Welcome to the HRNCQ show. Today we're going to talk about living and working in a BANI world. Now, it was a topic that we addressed in one of our Breakfast Bite events that we had back in January, but Sarah and I felt it was worth us continuing that conversation and bringing it onto the podcast show. So for any of our audience that are unfamiliar with BANI, you may have heard of the term VUCA, but BANI may be a new term for you. And so BANI means you're living in a world which is brittle, anxious, non-linear and incomprehensible. So with that in mind, I thought the first question probably should go over to Sarah and ask her, what do you think then it feels like for the average employee working in the UAE in 2026? Why does VUCA no longer quite capture what's going on?
So VUCA in its essence is rooted in change, and that change has happened or happening. And yes, you could argue that we're going through change, but I would also argue that we're in a period of varying degrees of chaos still, which is more in line with the BANI acronym. And as you've mentioned, BANI as an acronym stands for the brittle, anxious, non-linear and incomprehensible. So in the workplace, this is people dealing with uncertainty, it's dealing with anxiety. It could be down to current and future or even past geopolitical situations and challenges, as well as globalization. And then you've got the AI challenge that's lurking in the corner, the big elephant in the room.
Absolutely. And so I think the difference that I was conveying as well during the conference was that VUCA is very much about, if we've got a good vision, then we can kind of control the situation, and with rigid management, we can still make things happen. Whereas I think with BANI, as you say, it's about that chaos. And so even with a clear vision, can't necessarily predict the future anymore. With all of those things that you've mentioned, it means that it's a lot more about the chaos, and it's about the emotional toll that it has on our employees. And as leaders, we need to show a level of empathy and also adaptability.
Yeah, and I think something that, look, chaos is a big word to use, and it can be quite a scary word to use. And people think that, I think if you think about a traditional definition of chaos and what that might look like, it's like all plates spinning and everything up in the air all the time, when actually chaos can just be that there's no clear vision as to what it is. If we look at the UAE and the GCC region this year versus last year at the same time, there was an amount of predictability on how business was going to be happening. Those that are in seasonal businesses would know that, okay, we're coming to the end of our season, but actually this year a lot of people haven't even started their season yet because it was disrupted by the geopolitical situation regionally. So that is the type of chaos that we're talking about. Other things that if we move on a little bit from there in terms of the anxiety side of things, there's a lot of different levels of anxiety in the workplace for different reasons at the moment, around job stability, job security, generally speaking, and that is also heightened because of the current situations. And then you've also got other anxiety levels that are going on. Thankfully, as things seem to be on a positive drive at the moment with the ceasefire holding and things like this, without going into all the nitty-gritty of it, things are kind of settling down. But at one point, a couple of months back, there was a lot of anxiety around people who had never been in this situation before.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think even now that things have started to settle down in terms of the uncertainty in the region, all of the things that you mentioned, things like AI, the other geopolitical things that are going on around the world, globalization, are all still so unpredictable that even as things settle here, there's still this uncertainty about what does the future hold.
Yeah, and it's again, there's a lot of conversations that I'm having with various businesses are looking to September, that everything's going to be good again in September because, with the seasonality of the UAE for some industries, the summer's a wipeout already. and that's not a positive term to be using, but because it hasn't, they haven't had that entry point, so that where they've got the dip off for summer, it's just continued since March. But other things that we need to think about are, we've got another target looming for Emiratisation. And this is a massive push for those companies that are licensed under mainland. They have to hire more Emiratis by the end of July. So there are some exemptions. There were announced some exemptions or softening of that regulation for specific industries because of the current situation. But the majority of companies still need to drive that and push that. And that then can also lead to a state of flux and change in the workplace.
Absolutely. And so we were looking at Gallup's 2026 data when we were putting together our conference. And we were looking at the fact that it was indicating that employee stress levels have remained at near record highs for the last 3 consecutive years globally. And that's probably, as you say, because employees are navigating the pressures of Emiratisation, the pressures of AI, job insecurity, those rapid changes that's bringing about in organisations. So what are the signs that an organisation's culture is being shaped by anxiety rather than purpose?
So the indicators that I would look at would be things that are snap decisions being made. So things, major decisions that are being made probably slightly too quickly, that without doing a full review of all of the data and information that might support or defer a decision being made, if you see what I mean. Also looking at recruitment, either delaying recruitment, like not hiring because you don't know what's going to happen, but equally making the wrong decisions at recruitment, so hiring too quickly, not firing fast enough because it might pick up, and that kind of decision-making process. And then not having any succession planning in place, or poor succession planning, putting it on hold, not developing that because, again, companies not wanting to overcommit themselves from a financial perspective, which I completely respect and understand, but sometimes the business needs that and it will fail because it hasn't got that support in that direction. And then short-termism, literally just thinking week to week rather than forecasting month to month and forwards from there and looking at a medium to long-term plan, even if that long-term plan is just till the end of the year as being a long-term rather than what might be a 5-year plan. So in terms of anxiety, obviously we're talking about it from a very generalised perspective, but if we look at it from a cultural intelligence perspective, anxiety has different connotations when you talk about it with different cultures. Could you explain some of those to us?
Yeah, absolutely. So in some cultures, they feel a lot more comfortable to share their feelings and their emotions outwardly. And in others, they certainly wouldn't. They would keep those emotions to themselves. And so there may be levels of anxiety within your employee network, and yet you, as a HR team or senior leader within the organisation, are oblivious to the fact that that's how some of your employees are feeling, because either they're not outwardly showing those emotions, or because they don't feel the freedom to speak up and say, this is how these decisions that are being made are impacting me. So we talked earlier about, you and I have kind of come from a culture where it feels comfortable to challenge upwards. Yes. And yet there will be others that would never even dare or consider to do that because it would be seen as being disrespectful or dishonouring to the senior leader that they're having that conversation with. And so as leaders, we really have to be clear on how are we going beyond our own cultural lens to see what's really happening in the organisation, what our employees are actually thinking and feeling, and back to that point of BANI being about, as leaders, being more empathetic and being more adaptable to the type of leadership style that you're using with your employees, so that you can manage them through these anxious moments, regardless of how they are maybe showing or demonstrating that level of anxiety.
Yeah, no, and I can empathise with that, absolutely. I mean, I know I was always taught, I guess, and coached, at least by my dad, to manage my manager and manage upwards. And it's a very common thing, but not all managers will be responsive to that, and find it quite challenging in itself to have someone doing that. There are those that will accept it readily, but not all cultures will accept it readily. It's quite an interesting way. Is then that cultural intelligence, is that the best tool that we have for navigating this BANI world that we're living in at the moment?
I think it's a really positive framework to be using. If BANI is about, navigating chaos, basically, the CQ framework, the 4 capabilities, CQ drive, CQ knowledge, CQ strategy, and CQ action, are what will enable you to kind of try and make a bit more sense of those chaotic situations. So if you're working cross-culturally with people from lots of different cultures, we talked about the fact that BANI has come about, or one of the reasons why we're in a BANI world is because of globalization. We're more and more seeing people working cross-culturally with people from all over the world, whether they have moved to a new place in the world and living as an expat, or they're still living and working in their hometown, but they're on a daily basis having virtual calls with people from the other side of the world. We're all working globally these days. And so the CQ framework is about creating a level of a strategy, I suppose, around how do you handle those cross-cultural situations. So even in and amongst the chaos, there's some structure in the way that you're going to approach your interactions. CQ Drive says, even though I don't know what this situation looks like, that I have the motivation to engage in this conversation. And then CQ Strategy is saying, and I'm going to plan for those cross-cultural interactions to make sure that even though they might be non-linear and incomprehensible to me through my own cultural lens, I have armed myself with a plan of how I might tackle that interaction with my colleagues, even if I can't predict what it's going to look like.
Okay, that's really useful information, and I think that's important to share with our listeners or viewers, because it's something that we don't often talk about in explicit detail like that. We talk about CQ in a very broad term, but giving that specific details of the different pillars is really important. So thank you for sharing that information. So thank you for giving that detail. Following on from that then, if we think about professionals in the workplace, where can they learn these skills? How can they get this magic tool that's going to help them survive?
So for me, cultural intelligence is a soft skill or power skill that unfortunately has kind of been missed out of the box of tools that leaders are given. And yet it's one that these days I don't think a leader can do without. And it is a developable skill. So even if somebody is lacking that skill right now, it's something that they can go out and develop in themselves. So my recommendation would be for people really starting to focus on developing their cultural intelligence and thinking about, okay, whilst there's lots of things I can't predict, and I don't know what the future holds, I don't know what AI is going to do in the future, I don't know what the geopolitical state of the world's going to look like in the future, but what I do know is that globalization isn't slowing down. And so if there's one action that I can take for the future is to equip and arm myself with the ability to work more effectively with people from different cultures. So I would recommend that people are really honing in on that skill of, making sure that whenever I go into a cross-cultural interaction, I'm able to be more strategic in my approach. I've not just thought about what are the objectives of this interaction, but I've actually started to think about, and who's that interaction with, how will that impact the way that the interaction will play out, and how might I need to alter and adapt my approach so that that interaction is more effective.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that I've learnt to do is to kind of half anticipate looking at the cultures that I'm dealing with and speaking to, and kind of predict how they're going to behave, to teach myself. Obviously, I have the expert with me, but to teach myself to be cognizant of behaviors and why that might be, and why is that person reacting that way? Oh, because they're, that's their cultural behavior. That's this. Obviously, reading your book helps because it gives me an excellent framework to support that those observations with. But just starting with those simple observations, even about yourself, I think one of the things that's helped me with this is if I'm in a situation and I have a default reaction and I think, okay, why am I reacting that way? Oh, it's because, and actually sort of analyze myself, that I can then see that in others. And that helps me then reframe my response to whatever's been posed to me or said to me, in order that I'm not just culturally reacting as opposed to and then could be perceived as being rude or disrespectful when it's just my natural go-to reaction.
Yeah, I think it's about having that level of curiosity about perspective, like the curiosity to ask yourself, why is that my perspective? But also, what's the perspective of this other person in this interaction and why did they respond the way they did? Once we introduce that level of curiosity before we pose judgment on another, we are then opening up that whole situation for that interaction to have a much greater success.
Obviously, I have a one-on-one, I have a hotline to the expert here. But if you are interested to learn more about cultural intelligence, Emma, are you holding any masterclasses in the upcoming months? Where can people find out about them when you are?
Yeah, absolutely. They can reach out to me. We have masterclasses running that people can get themselves onto, but we also then offer in-house sessions as well. So depending on whether somebody's wanting to, sponsor and pay for themselves and just go on a masterclass, or whether it's actually an organisation that wants to put their leadership team through this, or their overall employees through cultural intelligence workshops, then we can certainly help people with that.
Fantastic. Okay. Well, look, it's been a really interesting conversation today, and thank you for all the insights that you've given and continue to give about the cultural intelligence world. Thank you for watching and listening to our podcast. We are launching a new website under HR and CQ Edge, so keep your eyes open for that information. We are also developing our community and our events, so please have a look on the website. The links will all be in the bio. Both Emma and I are extremely proud to have everybody listening and watching us. We've had a look at our stats and they're simply amazing, with 56 different nationalities or different countries downloading us and almost 2,000 downloads in total, I think, isn't it? So we've got some amazing stats and we really appreciate you listening to us. If you have any questions that you want answered that we're not answering, please don't hesitate to reach out, comment on any of the videos, either through LinkedIn, or reach out to either Emma or I directly. And look forward to seeing you hopefully at one of our next events, which we have one coming up in September. The dates and information will be on the website, and we'll see you in the next episode. Thank you.